Hey, welcome. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty excited to do this video. But first, I need to address a disclaimer here. This video is in no sense going to talk about the war. If you want to see a political view on the conflict, go somewhere else. I will also delete every heinous and war-related comment. However, I will show my support to the Ukrainian people by putting a link in the video description where you can donate and help them. You got it, this video is going to be about the Ukrainian language. This story started about a year ago. At that same time of the year, I was welcoming a Ukrainian friend that was fleeing the conflict. Before that, I didn't know anything about Ukraine, and I didn't know about anything about the language. But that person showed me their way of living, their way of seeing things, their culture, and most importantly, their language. At that point, I was done with Spanish and I was looking for another language to learn, and I was pretty interested in Slavic cultures. So Ukrainian became an apparent choice. As I do what I preach, I started with the very basics, like hello, please, thank you, bye. No, actually I started with the alphabet. You must be aware of that. Ukrainian uses the Cyrillic alphabet, slightly different from the Russian one, but it shares, I think, 27 letters with it. I will check. That was easier than expected. I thought it was going to be harder, but it took me time to read fast enough at a good pace, faster than 5 words per minute. And then I spent a lot of time learning how to pronounce things properly. Even though I couldn't say much, what I could say, I wanted to sound good and to be understood, because it's very easy to mispronounce in Ukrainian and say something different or not be understood at all. I must address a special mention to the h and h sounds that sounded exactly the same to me when I first started, and no one was able, none of my Ukrainian friends were able to explain to me the difference between the two or show me. So I kind of had to learn on my own, but now I think I have it. H and h. And I remember that one frustrating case where there's two words, hunger and cold, that sounded exactly the same to me. They're minimal pairs, that's how we call them. It's holodno and holodno. I also had a hard time with the softener and the hardener. Even to this day, it can get tricky. And Ukrainian doesn't have any problem sticking together consonants and vowels that have nothing to do with each other. Like dlia is not natural to me. Chvilin is minute. Hra is a game. Hrati is to play. And there's also chram. This one's hard. Chram, temple. Chram. Overall, my experience with Ukrainian has been fantastic. But I must say that tout n'était pas rose, like we say in French. It was not all beautiful, all fairy tales. At first, the learning curve is super steep. There's not much vocabulary in common when it comes to simple words. When I got more advanced and when I had a broader vocabulary, yeah, some words were the same as French and English. But at first, the pronouns, the particles, the verbs, the simple verbs, they're very different from French and English because it comes from old church of Slavonic and not Latin. So that was very hard, and for the first 5 to 6 months I was just able to read, to understand a little bit when people talk very slow, but I was not able to watch any shows and get them. I was not able to have a conversation or even express some basic ideas that I had on my mind. It was very hard, and I didn't get to a point where I could feel like I could say whatever I wanted after maybe 7 or 8 months. Let's say that the first few months consisted of a lot of rainy days. But I must say that I feel proud knowing that language, because not many people learn it, not many people speak it, and I even feel a sense of belonging to these people. Love their culture, I love how they see things, how they phrase things. They really are welcoming and generous. I can't explain how grateful I am to know this language and to have met all the friends I met here in Montreal, because there are a lot of Ukrainians that immigrated to Canada, and especially in Montreal and Toronto, and I had the chance to meet a few of them. I'm always happy when I hear Ukrainian in public, and from time to time I just go and have small talk, even if it's a bit awkward at first because it's not normal in their culture to go and have small talk, especially in public spaces. But once they understand that my intentions are pure, that I just want to practice their language, they open up and become super friendly. It's a very warm people. You just have to pass through this initial like cold phase, but after that they're nothing but friendly. By the way, I will be releasing at the same time as this a video where I'm talking to the camera for 10 minutes, improvising in Ukrainian only. So if you want to check my fluency, how I speak, and my accent maybe, go ahead and check that. And maybe you've never heard Ukrainian before and you want to see how it sounds like. Well, I'm not native, but you'll get a pretty good idea. So it's in the video description. Now, why am I saying that Ukrainian is an underrated language and the most underrated language? Well, because I observed that when people want to learn a Slavic language, they never go for Ukrainian. They always go for Russian or for Polish, maybe. But Ukrainian stands on its own. Even though it has been called the Little Russian for a while, which is very wrong and offensive, it's a language of its own. The culture is very different from the Polish culture or the Russian culture, and it's just like a whole other identity, and people don't give it a chance because there are not enough speakers. Well, there are more than 30 million, which is more than enough for me. And you can find Ukrainians, well, unfortunately, Ukrainians immigrated a bit everywhere in Europe and in North America, so, I mean, it's a great time to learn Ukrainian because it's going to be easy for you to practice. So if you want to learn a Slavic language, I strongly recommend you that you'll try Ukrainian. Even though it's not the easiest, you will like it. And there's a question I often get asked, it's how different are Russian and Ukrainian from each other? While Ukraine has wrongly been called for a good amount of time Little Russian, it's not true. It doesn't descend from Russian at all. It is not a dialect of Russian by any means. It evolved from Old Church Slavonic just like Russian or Byelorussian. It's part of the Eastern branch of Slavic languages, so that's why it shares a big lexical similarity with Russian, about 62%, and Byelorussian, I don't know the number. Ukrainian is actually closer to Polish than it is to Russian in terms of vocabulary, but the grammatical structure is closer to Russian and Byelorussians. To a non-trained ear, Russian and Ukrainian can sound the same way because they're pretty rough languages and they use some sounds that are similar. And the way they phrase things can be similar as well. However, once you know one of those two languages, they don't sound the same at all. There are some vowels that exist in Russian and not in Ukrainian, and vice versa. Even the e is not pronounced the same way, the o as well. Russian will say a, more like a or a for o, and Ukrainian keeps the o like round and sharp. And I must say that I prefer the way Ukrainian sounds because it's just much more melodic and the vowels are softer than in Russian. Ukrainians tend to add a rhythm to the way they talk, and you can go and check it on YouTube if you've never heard Ukrainian before, and you can also go and check the video where I speak Ukrainian for 10 minutes straight if you want to see how that sounds like, but Russian just doesn't have that. I can't explain. However, it's true that some Ukrainians speak more Russian than Ukrainian, especially in the eastern part and in Odessa, and they sometimes have an accent in Russian and they make Ukrainian sound a bit more like Russian. Now, the question you've all been waiting for, if you know anything about Slavic languages: how was it for me to learn the case system? If you don't know anything about Slavic languages and you don't know what a case system is, let me explain this to you. The case system is when the word ending changes according to the grammatical function of the word. It can be a noun, a pronoun, some adverbs, and an adjective in the sentence. So for example, in English, when we say I want some water, some gives the meaning to the sentence. And the order as well, like I want, what do you want? Some water. Okay. In Ukrainian, it doesn't work like that. In Ukrainian, the grammatical function is determined not by the order, but by the ending. So, like water in general is voda, but in the genitive case, when you add some in English, it's a genitive case, it's vody. So я хочу воды. And you can actually say хоче я воду. Хочу воды я хочу. It's not the usual way of saying things, but it still makes sense. At first, it didn't make sense to me at all. I thought that it was pretty useless to do things this way because like the system we have in Romance languages and in Germanic languages works well. Why change it? When I started actually hearing Ukrainian and like understanding what I was hearing, using those cases, not when I studied them, but when I really got a sense of how they're used and what they really mean and how they compare to like the sentence structure I was used to in Romance languages, they really started making sense to me. And I actually like the fact that you can phrase things however you want. There's not just one way of saying things that makes sense, there's like several. And I don't know, it's just very satisfying to use. But it took me a while to learn. Maybe I don't master it yet. There's still some cases that I'm not very comfortable with, but I guess like I always understand the cases I hear, and I use them right maybe like 80% of the time. I don't know. There are 7 cases for 3 genders and singular plural. Theoretically, there would be 42 word endings. I say theoretically, but because it's just not the case. See what I did here? There are maybe 10 to 15 different word endings that we use, and there are some patterns. It's not that random. I say 10 to 15 because some cases just don't change the ending, and some other cases borrow the same ending as some other case for another gender. So yeah, sometimes you just end up hearing the same ending but for different cases. Well, it doesn't seem intuitive when you're not used to it, but the speakers of Ukrainian and all those languages that use a case system are not aware of them. They know they use them, but they wouldn't be able to explain to you why they changed the word endings. They don't know that it's a genitive case, or they don't know that it's an instrumental case. They just use it. So I recommend, if you want to learn a language that uses a case system, you do the same. That's what I do in Ukrainian. I'm not like always thinking, oh, so I would say this in English. I would say some of this. Okay, so of this, I would put in the genitive case. No, I just say what I remember. I say what I feel. I try to use my emotions as much as possible to really make it intuitive, to make it frictionless, if I can say. Because when you start being in that analytical perspective, it's very hard to speak fast, and you will make more mistakes than if you just got it wrong a few times, and then just like remember in this situation, oh, with my friends, okay, z moimi друзьями, okay, and then you just remember that in this case you use this. Like, it's how I did it, and that's how people learn it. Don't let the case system of a language scare you, because yes, it's very different from English, but it's its own logic, and it's actually pretty cool once you get a good grasp of it and you can use it. It's very satisfying because yeah, the learning curve is pretty steep, like I said. And when it comes to genders, it had 3 genders, like I said: feminine, neutral, masculine. And I'd say it's the most consistent language I've studied so far when it comes to genders. Spanish is anything but consistent with it, like el idioma, but like la mama, like it doesn't make sense sometimes. A is el problema, didn't make sense to me at least. But Ukrainian is actually pretty consistent. So a would be feminine, e or o or ya sometimes can be neutral, and a consonant or a softener is masculine. It's that easy. And I mess up the gender sometimes, but I always understand why. It's never like, oh, why would this be neutral when, no, it just works well. When it comes to conjugation, it's easy-ish. I'm saying ish because, well, there are 3 tenses: present, future, and past. To this point, it's okay. But then there are 2 verb forms. So you have the perfective and the imperfective form. For example, brate is like to take, but in an imperfective manner, like on a long amount of time. Like, if I say I am taking this, я беру. But if you want to say I will take this, я взяю. It's взяти. It's not the same verb, but it means the same thing. And we translate it in the same way in English or in Romance languages. So that was a bit tricky. like I said, I try to use my emotions, my intuition most, but usually, I mean, even if you get it wrong, people understand you. Like when English learners say, I was doing it twice, or like, I don't know, if they mess up the tense use, you still understand them. Did I think about quitting? It's not that I thought about quitting, it's that when I first started learning Ukrainian, I just didn't believe that I would get there at some point. It seemed so far from me. It seemed so hard. It seemed like every time I wanted to say something new, I was asking my friend, oh, how can I say that? And then they gave me a new case. They gave me a new way of saying things. And it seemed a very, very far stretched that I would actually get there at some point. So I was like interested in it. I was learning about the culture, learning, like trying to read some stuff, some material, but I was not actually believing in it. So I was not taking the necessary action at first to actually get there. But it all changed when I came to Montreal and I started like meeting Ukrainians and actually be immersed in a room full of people speaking Ukrainian. So that's when like my ear was able to pick up most things, and I was forced to speak with them because most of them when they first come here don't really know English. So that was like perfect setting for me to go learn, practice, and that's when I saw really, really good improvements. When I actually started speaking to people and getting embarrassed and getting in tough situations where I didn't know how to get out of them because I didn't know the right words or how to phrase things. That's only when I started learning. And that's what inspired my video on the rainy day theory, if you want to go and check it. How did I learn Ukrainian? What was my method? What actions did I take to get to the level I am today? Okay. At first, I watched some videos, learned the basic pronunciation. I had someone to help me learn the alphabet and the pronunciation, give me some vocabulary, which was cool. And then I started to try to make my own sentences. For a while, I was trying to say basic things, but it was like not a very efficient way of going around it. It still kind of worked and gave me like a little level. And then in October last year, I started taking some lessons. It was pretty, it was all about the grammar, my lesson of Ukrainian. It was fun, but I didn't get to talk at all. It was just like the teacher was just giving me the cases and like the tables, and we had to repeat, to learn, did some grammar drills. So that made me understand the grammar a little better, but it didn't give me that much. I mean, like, I could have gone around it I could have done it without it. And then later on, I took a couple of Italki practice sessions with a professional teacher. I actually put her contact, like her Italki profile, in the video description because she was great. She really helped me perfect my comprehension and my grammar when I was talking. The lessons consisted of it was just like practice sessions. So we were just talking, having a nice conversation in Ukrainian. She was telling me how to say things when I didn't know. She was correcting me. So it was really good. She's very nice, very sweet. Her Ukrainian is very beautiful. So I recommend you book a lesson or two with her. And her name is Olia. But yeah, that's been my experience with Ukrainian. It's almost been a year since I started. I can now have full-on conversations for a few hours in Ukrainian. I will miss a few words here and there, but I can get around with English or by describing what I want to say. I am very, very grateful that friend first showed me how Ukrainian was, how beautiful that language was, that culture, because now it's a very important part of my life and my identity. I love speaking about that culture, speaking about that country. And I really recommend you try to learn Ukrainian if you're interested in the Slavic cultures. It's unique, I don't know, I can't describe it, it's great. Thank you very much for watching. In the description, I will put some resources if you want for some videos I watched to learn Ukrainian, for some, like my Italki tutor or professor. I will also do a playlist of the songs I love in Ukrainian, because I listened to a lot of Ukrainian songs in the past year. So I'll do a playlist of this, and I will also link the video where I'm speaking Ukrainian for 10 minutes straight, if you want to see how it sounds like and see how I speak. Thank you very much for watching. Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava.